Magandang araw, mga kababayan, mga ka-DDS. Disclaimer lang ang pag-repost at pag-replay ko sa video content na ito ay propagation purposes para sa dagdag kaalaman ng ating mga viewers. Credit to the rightful owner, Attorney Nel Abayon. Panoorin natin mga kababayan.
Okay, so pag-usapan po natin tungkol sa quote-unquote resignation ni former Executive Secretary Bersamin. So ang nangyari po kasi talaga dito is that in-announce ng PCO na nag-resign daw siya out of delikadeza. Pero ngayon, ang sabi ni ES Bersamin, hindi ko alam paano nagsimula yan. At yung conclusion po niya, hindi ako nag-resign. Yan yung pinakapunto po ni former ES Bersamin. So ipapakita ko po sa inyo yung pinakauna nito, yung nung November 17, and then yung pinaka-latest na development. Tapos of course, as usual, mag-explain din po ako ng mga legal issues or mga legal implications po because of this misunderstanding between the former ES and the Office of the President na Malacanang and the PCO. Okay? So, good day po, my fellow taong bayan, and to start things off, of course, is the facts of our discussion. So, yung pinakauna po nito was on November 17, 2025, Malacanang press briefing with USEC Claire Castro. Okay, so panoorin natin ng saglit para makita at marinig nyo po mismo kung ano yung sinabi ni USEC Claire noong November 17.
President Marcos accepts resignation of Executive Secretary Lucas P. Bersamin and Budget Secretary Amena Pangandaman. President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. has formally accepted the resignations of Executive Secretary Lucas P. Bersamin and Department of Budget and Management Secretary Amena Pangandaman. Both officials respectfully offered and tendered their resignations out of delicadeza after their departments were mentioned in allegations related to the flood control anomaly currently under investigation, and in recognition of the responsibility to allow the administration to address the matter appropriately. The President conveys his deep appreciation to Executive Secretary Bersamin for his steady leadership at the helm of the Office of the Executive Secretary.
Okay, so I think yun naman na yung important talaga doon. Narinig natin yung pagtanggap daw po ni PBBM ng resignation letter ni ES Bersamin and ni Secretary Pangandaman of DBM, and that it was out of delicadeza daw po because of all the flood control issues ngayon, kung saan nililink na rin yung dalawang public figures na yon. So yan po happened on November 17, 2025. And i-share ko na lang din po, this was actually discussed or asked sa akin nung sa INC rally nung November 17 because I attended the rally, and then may media briefing po doon. Tinanong ako ng mga ilang questions sa media center po ng INC, and then one of the questions asked to me back then was kung ano daw yung pananaw ko sa pag-resign. And unfortunately or fortunately, hindi ako sumagot doon ng anything conclusory or presumptive kasi hindi ko pa alam. Yung sinabi ko dito sa picture na to is hindi ko pa alam yung full picture kasi number one, hindi ko pa nakita yung actual resignation letters ni S. Bersamin, so it would have been premature kung nag-comment na ako dito right then and there. And buti na lang po, hindi talaga ako nag-comment kasi hindi pa talaga klaro ano yung nangyari on this day. Kasi yung nangyari pa lang nito, this was November 17 din, was this one na according daw kay USEC Claire, tinanggap ni PBBM. However, nung November 19, 2025, naglabas ngayon ng statement si ES Bersamin na hindi yun totoo. Diba? Masarap lang daw pakinggan yung out of delicadeza, pero hindi naman totoo yan. Hindi ako nag-resign. Wala siyang resignation na final. Diba? So basahin natin itong buo para mas klaro talaga. Hindi ko alam paano nagsimula yan na nag-resign ako. In-announce siguro yan pero wala akong resignation na final. Kasi sinabi na lumabas, nabasa ko na lang, I resigned out of delicadeza. Masarap pakinggan yung out of delicadeza, pero hindi naman totoo yan. Hindi ako nag-resign. Former Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin, published on November 19, 2025. So kung makita po nyo ngayon, there are really conflicting opinions between the Malacanang and the former ES. Diba? And then yung next po na kailangan natin i-take note dito is this one naman. This one happened on 1 day ago din po, more or less nangyari to. Wala kasing date dito sa post mismo. So ipakita ko rin po sa inyo to kung ano yung naging issue dito between Yusek Claire and Miss Catherine Domingo of ABS-CBN News.
The former executive secretary denied that he resigned out of his own accord. So ano po yung totoong reason kung bakit po siya tinanggal at sino po yung nagpatanggal?
Muli, binanggit na po natin ang ating sagot at sila'y nagkausap na po at sinabi nga po natin, pabayaan na po natin at sila naman po ay nagkausap na.
I'm sorry, hindi namin pwede pabayaan because the taxpayers who are funding the government and are actually paying the salaries of this administration is actually asking for the truth from the palace. Bakit po natanggal yung executive secretary at sino po yung nagpatanggal?
Hindi ko po masasabi kung sino po nagpatanggal sa kanya. Binanggit ko po kanina na hindi ko po alam kung sinong kausap niya. Kung yung pa ang nababasa ng palasyo dahil sinabit niya naman po ang sarili niya sa President's prerogative, yan lang po ang ating masasabi. At tinanggap po ang sinasabing resignation.
Okay, Harry, the
So
former...
yan po yung pinaka-facts natin. Nagka-announcement and then the former ES Bersamin denied it. And then ngayon yung position is ng palasyo, ng position po ng PCO ng Malacanang is that nagkausap naman na daw. So let's just leave it. Nagkausap naman na daw sila. So let's just leave it at that. Pero ayaw pumayag dito ni Miss Katrina Domingo. Kasi we have the right to know the truth kung ano yung reason. And if you ask me, tama naman na we really have the right to know the truth. Kasi kung dito pa lang, di ba, sa minor issue may problem na. So, how much more in bigger problems? Pero anyway po, yan yung pinaka-facts natin. Now let's go to the legal side of things naman po. So, dito po, ang kailangan lang talaga natin tandaan dito is the provisions on public office is a public trust. Diba? So, ang ibig sabihin lang yan, dapat po yung mga public servants natin when they perform their actions is they should always consider the public. It should always be for the benefit of the public. So, that includes being truthful, being transparent, and being accountable for actions and mga mistakes po ng mga public servants natin. So, ang dilemma lang natin dito, number one, is that it would appear from how I view it, hindi nagiging transparent or truthful yung Malacanang. Kasi kung titingnan po natin, magka-conflict yung opinion ng tao na ina-allege silang nag-resign from their own statements. Diba? At kung ako po ang tatanungin ninyo, the best witness or the best person to testify as to the fact of whether or not nag-resign ba talaga siya is of course none other than the person who they are alleging to have resigned. Diba? Kasi the act of resignation po, that is a voluntary act. Supposedly, that's a voluntary act of the employee or in this case po, the appointee, kung whether or not magre-resign ba siya. So dahil dyan, voluntary act niya yan, siya yung best witness niyan kung ginawa ba niya yung act of resignation or hindi. Hindi po yung ibang tao because that will be hearsay because it will be coming from third persons yung nagsasabi. So mas kakampihan ko po or mas papaniwalaan basically si ES Bersamin dito. Yun yung pinaka main point ko talaga because he is the best person to testify and to establish whether or not he resigned. Kasi dapat po sarili niyang act yun. Diba? So yun, yan po yung una kong masasabi dyan. Then idagdag ko na lang din po kung i-apply natin to sa labor laws. Although hindi talaga to strictly related kasi appointee naman to si ES Bersamin. But just out of legal discussion para lang po dyan sa mga manggagawa natin, sa mga employees natin, magka-idea rin kayo. Itong nangyari kay ES Bersamin, this is somewhat similar to what we call constructive dismissal in labor cases. Kung saan hindi ka pa talaga nag-resign or hindi ka pa talaga na-dismiss from office but because of the actions of your employer ay natanggal ka sa trabaho basically para kang napilitan or na-compel or na-induce to lose your employment because of the actions of your employer. So somewhat similar po to siya in a sense para sa akin to constructive dismissal kasi hindi pa nga siya nag-resign talaga, hindi pa siya natanggal sa trabaho pero pinapalabas na na-resign siya. Pinangunahan siya basically nung appointing authority or in our discussion the employer. But again, tandaan po nyo, hindi talaga to strictly nag-apply kasi appointee and appointing authority naman yung discussion. But more or less, parang ganun po siya sa labor case. So yung mga laborers dyan, yung mga employees, I'm sure familiar kayo dyan sa constructive dismissal. Yan kasi yung isa sa mga common cases talaga na nilalapit sa akin when it involves labor cases, more or less constructive dismissal. So gusto ko lang din po yung idagdag yan just for discussion purposes. Okay, and then yung pangalawa pa po na i-consider natin dito is whether or not naging transparent ba yung Malacanang sa situation or sa issue na to. And if you ask me, meron din pong problem as to the transparency. Hindi lang po dun sa pagiging truthful nila. Kasi in this press briefing that I showed you, ayaw lang din nila sabihin kung ano talaga yung rason. Diba? Sinasabi lang nila, nagkausap na daw yung Pangulo and let's just leave it at that. From there pa lang po, diba? Hindi na yun transparent kasi hindi po natin nalalaman ano yung actual na mga nangyari behind the scenes. And since this is linked to a very big flood control or corruption issue, sa tingin ko naman po it is our right, the Filipino people, the taong bayan, na mag-seek and mag-ask for transparency and truthfulness as to this issue. Kasi hindi na po to simpleng resignation lang pinapag-usapan. This is already being linked dun sa mga flood control issues natin. So, ang best case scenario po sana dito ay fully naging transparent yung Malacanang, yung PCO sa atin para alam natin kung ano talaga yung nangyayari ba. Para hindi tayo nagkakaroon ng doubt na nagkakaroon ng pointing of fingers, takipan, kung sino yung mga alleged or possible mastermind dun sa very grave and massive flood control issue that our country is currently facing. Okay? And then lastly po, magbibigay na lang din ako ng thoughts ko kung ano yung implication nito sa political side of things sa actions ng Malacanang, ng PCO in relation dun sa pag-rebut or pag-refute sa kanila ni former ES Bersamin. So ang masasabi ko lang po talaga, again, tatandaan lang sana ng public servants natin, yung public office is a public trust. So because of their actions nga po, there are no questions arising from the public whether or not truthful ba talaga and transparent yung Malacanang, yung executive in relation to their government actions. Diba? And the reason kaya ako yan siya i-emphasize because like what I stated earlier, hindi na nga to siya simpleng issue on whether or not nag-resign ba o hindi si ES Bersamin. Yun, that is only a very minor issue lang yun na pwede sana natin i-let go. But since this is already tied up nga po or linked to the very massive corruption issue, the flood control issue that we are currently facing, then the Malacanang, the PCO, the executive should have been as transparent and as truthful as much as possible to avoid any doubt or questions po in the mind of a reasonable member of the taong bayan of the Republic of the Philippines. Diba? Kasi because of that, na hindi sila naging transparent, hindi sila naging truthful, ngayon, any reasonable person would start to question and start to think kung sa ganito nga, na resignation lang yung issue, hindi sila truthful, how much more in all other bigger issues, di ba? It is very likely ngayon na may mga ganong nag-iisip na members ng taong bayan po ng ating bansa. Kasi yun nga po, ito na lang resignation, hindi sila transparent, hindi sila truthful. How much more kung meron ng kulong involved, kung malink talaga yung pangalan ng mga political figures or ng mga public servants po natin. Diba? At isa pa po, idagdag ko na lang din, ang problema ko lang din po dito, lumabas na nga talaga na hindi nag-resign si ES Bersamin pero very defensive pa rin po yung PCO, specifically si Attorney Claire Castro. Diba? I mean, gaano lang ba kadali mag-apologize, diba? Papasok dyan ngayon yung accountability. Kung lumabas na nagkaroon ng misunderstanding or miscommunication between the Office of the President and former ES Bersamin, ano lang ba na mag-apologize na lang sila yung Office of the President or the Executive na nagka-misunderstanding? Diba? Ang dali lang naman po sana sabihin nun eh. Pero ngayon, ang dating pa dyan, sinasabihan lang tayo na let's just leave it at that kasi nag-usap na daw sila. And buti na lang po, si Miss Katrina Domingo dito of ABS-CBN really stood up and stood firm sa position niya and reminded Claire Castro na the taxpayers ang nagpapasweldo dun sa public servants, sa mga government officials na yan lahat. Therefore, we have the right to transparency, truthfulness, and accountability. Kasi ang dating sa akin ito, yung statement ni Attorney Claire Castro, with all due respect to her, ang dating parang ginagaslight ngayon eh, yung taong bayan, di ba, na bakit daw, hindi naman bakit daw, na let's just leave it at that, tapos naman na nagkausap, so tapos na lang, ganun-ganun na lang dapat. Pero again, hindi po dapat ganun yun, di ba? Because they are public servants and the basic principle po of public office is a public trust. Papasok po yan. So they should always be truthful, transparent, and accountable to the Filipino people kasi tayo po ang nagbibigay ng authority sa kanila para magserbisyo, di ba? So dapat po pakinggan nila tayo at maging truthful lang sila talaga. Okay, so anyway po, hopefully klaro yan. If you like more legal, educational videos and current events, subscribe lang po kayo sa channel ko. And until next time, see you all po. Bye-bye!